Welcome to the Hidden Bookcase. Come through and get cozy. Pick a book, your favourite book, that's the one that opens this room. Inside you'll find a warm fire, a loving cat, and a wide skylight to the stars.
And a dangerously high to be red pile.
I'm Morgan, I use they them pronouns, and I am a miniature lop.
I'm Soren, I use he him pronouns, and I am a volcano rabbit.
We've been friends for over a decade and are always swapping books.
Each fortnight we take it in turns to recommend one another a favourite read. The first time reader tells us what they know about the book, makes some predictions about what they don't, and then we discuss our thoughts with all of you bookworms.
So today let's get to talking about
Rabbit Test by Samantha Mills.
I feel like I should start off this episode by saying that Soren and I have been talking about rabbits for the last hour.
We have.
On and off. It's been great, and now I'm convinced I need a rabbit.
I think you do need a rabbit, I agree.
Except it will chew my books.
Except you'll get glass-fronted bookcases, as we have discussed. Everything is in place.
That's a whole plan.
Thank you for being on the Patreon and helping us to afford Morgan's glass-fronted bookcases.
With your help of a £2 donation a month, one day in 15 years' time, Morgan will get glass-fronted bookcases, and all will be right with the world.
I think our lowest tier is £3, actually, but that's fine.
Ignore me.
Even closer.
So, Soren, tell me about the rabbits.
The rabbits took me by surprise. They
mugged you in an alley at 3 a.m. at knife point.
They did. I wasn't ready. I don't remember exactly how I came across this story. I feel like it was probably on Twitter or X. I'm not going to stop calling it X. I'm just going to say that now, by the way. If you guys are listening to my outros every time and wondering, when is Soren going to start saying X instead of Twitter? The answer is never. You'll never take me alive.
We don't dead name people. We do dead name websites.
We do dead name websites. So I think it was on Twitter, and I feel like it was just on Uncanny's Twitter page, like maybe they retweeted being like, here's a random story, or maybe I was just browsing, because I do just sort of leaf through the Uncanny website when I'm bored. Definitely not at work. And this one grabbed me, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since late 2022. I think it was very shortly after Roe v. Wade that I read this, so it was on the brain. But to summarize, Rabbit Test is a speculative fiction story about a theoretical world, well, less theoretical than I would like, but a theoretical world where abortion has been criminalized again, at least in the States. People with uteruses have to have a rabbit test installed. Everyone's sort of cyborgs and you can sort of Google things with your eyes. That's just sort of taken for granted, not really explained. But one of those things is that you have a internal pregnancy test, if you like, that will just trigger if you miss your period for a few days. And the sort of protagonist of this story, it follows a lot of people over disparate time periods, is a young girl of 17 whose rabbit test is about to be triggered, and she's concerned because she's had sex recently and she's missed her period, and she's trying to find a way to obscure the fact that she's pregnant from her religious fundamentalist parents and get out of the situation, basically. Shall we listen to your blind?
Yes. Short and sweet one today. I know absolutely nothing about Rabbit Test except for the name and that it's a short story. I don't know the genre. I'm gonna guess that there's no real rabbits in it because metaphors. That is my wild prediction. But I have nothing else, so let's see what happens.
I think you're correct. There's technically no rabbits. There's a reference to real rabbits, I guess.
Yeah, rabbits are discussed. I feel like I have to start by saying it's not like I was actively imagining that this was set on the moon.
What? That's not what I was expecting you to say.
Let me finish. So I wasn't like actively imagining it, but I was kind of just assuming that it was set on the moon, especially in Grace's point of view.
Because rabbits?
Because I read Spirits Abroad by Zen Cho a couple months ago, which is a short story collection. And one of the final short stories, is called The 4 Generations of Chang'e, and it is about these 4 generations of women in this family, and how the first one is like born on Earth, and then the second one like is born on the moon, because the mother was always like looking up at the moon and like wanting to go to the moon, and then the daughter wants to go back to the ground, and then it's like this whole like generational thing. And the third daughter, I think, the native people of the moon are rabbit people. Yeah. And she like ends up with this rabbit person, and her mother is horrified, and then her kids are like half rabbit folk, and then they end up back on the ground. Point being, my brain just linked the 2 stories and was like, oh yeah, it's about rabbits, it's set in the future, it's like episodic back and forth in time, of course it's set on the moon.
Fair. I can kind of see how you got there. I mean, like, rabbits and the moon have been very linked in many cultures, so sure.
So You can't tell me this wasn't set on the moon because it's never said that it was set on Earth.
I mean, some of it I would say is definitely set on
The
Earth.
past is definitely set on Earth, but the future bits, it's never even said which country it's set in.
It could be the moon.
It happened on the moon.
It's heavily implied to be America.
It's the moon. It's the US of the moon.
I feel like if the states conquered the moon, they would just make it one of the states. Do you know what I mean?
The 52nd state.
Yeah.
How many states are there?
I don't actually know. I was just assuming that you knew. There are 50.
So, the 51st state is the moon. Except, hopefully not, because please don't colonize the moon.
We don't have a cover to discuss, sadly, because this was printed in a magazine, Uncanny Magazine, which, by the way, if you want queer sci-fi and fantasy, a lot of their stuff is queer. And it's always pretty good. Alex C. Harrow has written short stories on there. Charlie Jane Anders has written short stories on there. And it's all free on their website.
You're selling it well.
So how do we feel about the writing style?
It itched some part of my brain.
Oh, I thought it would. I'm glad.
It's very me. It's very fanfic. It's very sort of like repetition and refrain, which are, I eat them up. They're like poetry for my soul. They're like repetitive, like introduction of like, it is. Oof. I don't know what it is.
Thematically in this story, it serves so well because it has that effect of reminding you of how long this has been going on and establishing it as that connecting thread.
Yeah. It feels very ritualistic. Obviously, we get that bit where Olivia is speaking at the end and she says, it is this date. And it feels like this could have been her whole speech. She could have just been saying this as the whole thing. It feels like a call to arms. It feels very traditional, bardic.
Yeah. I think it's a nice use of technique in a way that's also like very accessible. Like I wouldn't hesitate to recommend this to somebody that doesn't really read it all. And I think it's easy to follow despite weaving a lot of storylines together and jumping around quite a lot. This is the Queer Podcast. We need to talk about the fact that this is so trans-inclusive, and I really, really loved that.
Ambrose, MVP.
Ambrose MVP. Was I imagining him as Ambrose from the Attic Monologues the entire time? Yes, because it's a very uncommon name. So I was like, wow, some stuff has gone down in Ambrose's life. But I feel like he would also be doing this.
I feel like I could see that character progression.
Apologies to anyone that hasn't listened to the Attic Monologues, but the Attic Monologues is written by Morgan and is a urban fantasy podcast which happens to involve an Ambrose. And I feel like this is just something that he would do because he's very about community and about helping people out. I feel like maybe Ambrose wouldn't charge.
Atheru would be standing over him being like, get them to pay you money! And Ambrose would be like, but I can't.
That's exactly what the dynamic would be.
I can't make them pay me.
But anyway, that's a side note. I was really happy to read that because the first time I was reading this, I had no idea if it would be queer inclusive or not. That really surprised me. And then the return of that later in the segment where it's sort of giving people's reasons just in little fragments. I don't think it actually ended up in the episode, but you were talking in, oh God, what episode was it? I don't know, but I edited it recently, but I've done a lot of editing recently, so it's kind of blurred together. You were talking about a professor that you had, who I assume we won't name, about how there wasn't room in a speculative setting for trans characters, even though it was discussing gender. And I feel like this story is a great example of why it's so necessary, because we are a part of that equation. I think it's disingenuous to cut people out. And I think this story also does a good job of framing this mainly as a woman's issue, because as a trans man, I would agree that it is mainly a woman's issue. It is women that it mainly affects. Women just statistically are more likely to have a womb, but without leaving anybody out, it still encompasses everything.
Also just love that Ambrose is like, yes, the old womb exhume.
Honestly.
That was so funny.
I'm going to start referring to it as that, especially if I get one.
The womb exhume.
That was very on brand, I feel like, for a trans person of like this age. And I guess Ambrose would be about our age maybe he would be a bit younger.
It's got the same energy as Titus Etus.
Exactly. Yeah, it does.
Top-notch comedy.
Which is needed in this fucking story, honestly, because it is very dark. It has made me cry every single time I've read it.
I did not tear up.
There you go. This is the one that gets me.
Uno reverse.
To be fair, I think I was particularly raw the first time I read it because it was so soon after that I was, thinking about real people. And I'm still thinking about real people, I suppose, when I read it.
I really liked the environmental bent of it. It's something that I'm seeing increasingly being explored in fiction. And the righteous anger of people. Like when Grace gets out of prison and she's like, the only thing that's changed is I'm angrier now. And I'm like, go off, queen. I love this for you. Her character arc really, I know it's supposed to be the through line of the whole story, but I really, really liked following that. I mean, obviously not liked because it's fucking awful, but
yeah,
I really enjoyed following that storyline.
I think it's really successful in that when you're writing something like this, you want to be discussing it with some degree of universality, which I think this achieves really well, but also gives you Grace as that anchor. But I think there's just so many things about this that feel so topical. One thing that was like driving me insane on a reread, even more so, Grace is scrolling through all of the forums and she's trying to find euphemisms for what she's looking for. Recently, I was just watching a random video on YouTube and they were like, oh, because of the algorithm, I'm just going to refer to it as the procedure, but it was about abortion. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what's happening here, as people talking around it. And I've seen people do the same thing on TikTok, using different words in the subtitles than they're using out loud because they don't want things to get flagged.
When Roe v. Wade first got overturned, there was a lot of people talking about camping trips.
Yeah.
And that was like the euphemism. We started off with, instead of saying like killed, saying unalived. And like, there's a certain amount of times I can get behind that. And then we just start sliding in back into having to codify language in order to survive. And it's not to be like this is the end times, but really fucking sucks.
It really does.
Did not think that things would be sliding back so fast in my own lifetime.
Yeah, I was also thinking when I first read this, if I had read this even a year ago, I would have been doubtful about it, quite frankly. And then, I mean, I was reading it in the frame of mind where I was like, no, I feel like this could definitely happen. I feel like this is, I'm going to slag off Black Mirror. I feel like this is Black Mirror if Black Mirror thought about women and also intersectionality, rather than just being like, computers scary. I feel like this is what it's trying to do, and what a lot of speculative fiction, speculative horror, if you like, because I feel like it could arguably be called that, misses. It is just so informed by what's already happening. I guess arguably in like a similar vein to the way that The Handmaid's Tale is, where Atwood went, I'm only going to use things that have already happened so that it is all technically possible, even if it's happened somewhere else or a different time. But I feel like that has that sort of weight to it where it just feels horribly plausible. I do love, and this is a bit of a tangent, but Mills has clearly put so much research into this and like so much love into it, and also anger. All of the good emotions that make a wonderful piece of writing. I'm a bit of a nerd. I'm just like, oh, cool, I got to learn something. It's not really something that I've thought much about, really, is how do contraceptives work historically, which I'm kind of a bit like, I should have, because I love fantasy so much, and almost all of these are historical settings where people would have to come up with a different way, whether it's magic or whether it's herbs or something else.
Especially in fantasy, especially in sci-fi, the genre has been overwhelmingly dominated by men until fairly recently. And people like to just be like, oh, this is escapism, we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to think about that one. But actually, it's very intrinsic to the world building.
If you're ignoring it, you're just not thinking about how does this society function, because if people can't plan their families, they're going to have more kids. Inheritance might work differently. There's just so many ripple effects.
I liked how this talked about different cultures, the different plants that they've used. And the different methods that they've had, comparing the single book that the Victorian lady has versus the hundreds of plants that the native tribe has. How devastating that loss of knowledge is.
Exactly. I really loved that bit as well. I think another thing that this book does really well on that subject is that intersectionality, mentioning the black woman who's involved in the abortion league, and talking about how the people that are needing that service aren't necessarily the ones in that service, and she wants to represent a friendly face for them. And then similarly, that flash from the woman in the 1800s has that brief mention of what's happening to enslaved women during that period of time, and how they don't have an access, and how if they do have that access and they get caught.
And having the balls to say the character that we're talking about doesn't care.
Yeah.
Because realistically, unfortunately, most people didn't.
It would be so easy to say, I want that character to be sympathetic, so I'm going to make her an abolitionist, I'm going to make her a suffragette, whatever it might be. But I think you get the sense very much of these ordinary people who are just trying to navigate the life that they have and the body that they have. And I think that's really valuable, because it is that thing of like, it shouldn't have to be, you're a good person to secure this right, quite frankly. It should be enable. It's like the thing of like, oh, well, I'm going to misgender that person because they're an asshole. No, you're not. You just have to treat everybody equally, and everyone has a right to a certain level of bodily autonomy. And even that bit at the end, which says she doesn't want to. She doesn't have to be running from a monster. She doesn't have to have a health condition, etc. It just shouldn't be something that's forced on someone, which is said, explicitly. You could argue that this is a little bit in your face about its themes and message, but I don't think that that is a point against it, at least in my opinion.
Yeah. Especially at the moment, we kind of need that.
Yeah.
People are not doing well with the media literacy at the moment. This is what we need.
I think it's interesting because in some ways it almost doesn't feel like fiction, even though it very much is, because it is like sci-fi. And obviously it's following fictional characters, so it's fiction. But because it's so immediate, it almost feels like an essay or a call to arms, as you were saying before. I can't believe that people just used to look at pee to try and figure out if you're pregnant. I want to say that. Wild.
The different versions of the pee as well. It's like this one where we're like making corn sprout. That kind of works. The one where we're looking for maggots? No.
No.
It's so funny.
I'm kind of curious because that's the only completely BS one, I guess, that gets mentioned. Is it? There must have been so many. That's what people should be putting in their fantasy settings, is the ridiculous ways people have to determine whether someone's pregnant. Because there must be some that are like not even like vaguely medicine. There must have been some like, if you go to sleep with a fish and you wake up and the fish is still in your bed, then you're pregnant or something. Like there must have been like folklore ones all the time.
This is what fiction is missing.
Yeah.
Is more like beliefs that are just absolute bullshit. Everything's like, oh, this just works because it's magic. Okay, people will still believe the most insane stuff.
Completely, yeah.
Let them be crazy about it, even more when there's also magic. Because the average Joe doesn't know how magic works.
And if you've never seen any evidence to the contrary, and if you live in a small village where just out of pure statistics, whatever weird test has just happened to work a couple of times in a row, you're totally going to believe it.
It rained after I had sex one time, therefore I'm pregnant.
Yeah.
Every time it rains.
Every time it rains, I know. Not in England.
Pathetic fallacy took a real dark turn.
Oh dear. I will say, as much as we're making fun of these beliefs as well, I do love the tone of that, like even when it's mentioning, you know, the maggot situation, all of these methods that we can see with the modern hindsight aren't going to work. It is so respectful of everyone who's ever had to turn to those methods, because if you didn't have anything else, what are you supposed to do? And again, you just wanted to know, as the narrative says. I think it's very humanizing in a way. It's putting you in contact with that very basic desire.
Yeah. The story is just deeply empathetic.
And maybe for our generation, it's something we've taken for granted a little bit, just because we've always lived, or at least in the UK for the pair of us, people know when they're pregnant. You can just go to the Tesco. I don't know why you would have to be a Tesco. That's the first thing I thought of. Go to Tesco and buy a pregnancy test. That's actually kind of a luxury compared to thousands of years where you wouldn't know until you showed, or until, you know, you wouldn't know for sure anyway. You mentioned the final scene earlier, which I really, really love. I also really love the line, she pulls ready tight to her side, a child she chose. I think there's just a lot of really simple language in this that's really, really effective.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of metaphor. There's not a lot of verbose vocabulary. It's just very direct. Morgan, you're the new reader here. Will you give us your final thoughts on Rabbit Test?
I feel like I can't say I enjoyed it just because it's very depressing.
That's fair.
But I really enjoyed it, I guess. It was really interesting. I learned a lot. I thought it was beautifully written, and it said what it wanted to say in exactly the right amount of words. 5 stars. Soren, what about you?
I mean, co-signed. I just think this is so moving and effective and well-researched, and as you said before, empathetic. And I think you can tell it's written from a very emotional and caring place. And I think it's simple and accessible, something that I can imagine an English teacher pulling out for their class. I feel like it could be looked at as a historical piece of literature that marks this moment in the future. And I hope that that future will not look like the future described in this story. And I would also give this 5 stars. Do we have any recommendations? That's a weird one for this one, I think.
I have 2 structurally. The first one is the short story from Spirits Abroad by Zen Cho, the 4 generations of Chang'e, because that also deals with sort of like generations and with femininity and with rabbits. And then my second one will be Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel, because that follows 3 different timelines. One of them is on the moon, and then one of them is like the 1800s, and one of them is modern day, I believe. And that is sort of looking at speculative futures and how generations connect. And then also about potential pandemics, which is really fun. Brackets, not.
I love the blend of historical and speculative fiction. I'd love to see more of it in fiction in general. I think it sort of anchors the speculative.
I'm not a historical fiction girly, but I will make an exception sometimes. Do you have any recommendations?
If you have somehow not read The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, It is not as intersectional as this. I think it kind of tries to be, but I feel like you could argue as well that that's a facet of the protagonist's point of view, and that maybe she's not thinking about other women as much as she possibly could be. But at least to me, it feels like queer people are a little bit of an afterthought, women of colour are a little bit of an afterthought. Also, I kind of wanted to see a little bit more of in this, maybe. Like, I'm still giving this 5 stars because it just emotionally affected me so much. I would have liked to see a little bit more acknowledgement of how disabled women or disabled people with uteruses are being faced by this, both historically and in the future, because I think that's like another element that deserves to be heard. But I do think The Handmaid's Tale is interesting and is worth reading. Maybe check the trigger warnings before you're going in and be in the right headspace.
Also non-linear narrative.
And I think that she does that very well, to be fair.
Really fun when you're trying to find a specific quote in the middle of an exam and you don't know if it's on page 70, 111 or 312.
Literally, I remember this so vividly.
Anyway,
I want to also recommend, even though we've done it on the show, Daughters of Sparta, which was Morgan's pick for our Greek Mythology Retelling Month by Claire Heywood. Also a lot about motherhood, also a lot about bodily autonomy in relation to pregnancy. If you enjoyed the historical bent of this and looking into that theme that's so often under-discussed, I think Claire Heywood does a fantastic job of that.
This is a really hot take, actually, really quickly. I'm going to recommend some music.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm going to recommend basically anything by Sophia Isella, but especially Us and Pigs, because I've been listening to Everybody Supports Women on repeat, but one of the first songs that she did that was like viral was Us and Pigs, and it is very much on the same theme.
We don't say what we're doing next because this is the Patreon, so I guess you'll find out.
You'll find out when we find out.
This will come out in November, presumably, during Necromancy Month.
If you were really pro-life, you'd learn necromancy, actually.
Oh my god, you're so right.
Start with the dead before you start making more life. God damn it.